Most people see a shaved head, knuckle tattoos down both hands, and a corner booth that the rest of Cedar Hollow has quietly agreed to leave empty, and they keep walking without deciding to. They see danger. They see trouble. They see a man whose morning you do not want to interrupt. But on an ordinary bright Tuesday in October, an 82-year-old blind man crossed the length of Pete's diner with his cane tapping the linoleum in a rhythm he had walked 1,000 times, stopped directly in front of that booth, and asked a question the whole room heard. "Can I sit with you?" Silas Vance set his fork down and looked at the old man for a long moment before he answered. Not at his clouded eyes first. At the cane. At the careful, counted way he had crossed a room he could not see. At a shirt buttoned one hole off. The kind of small mistake a person only makes when there is no one left at home checking behind him. Whatever Silas said next would uncover something in that old man's house that no one in Cedar Hollow, least of all Silas, was prepared to find. Pete's Diner sat on the courthouse square in Cedar Hollow the way it had for 60 years. Red vinyl booths gone the color of dried clay. A pie case by the register that turned slowly under yellow light. The smell was bacon grease and burnt coffee and, this time of year, cinnamon from whatever Pete's wife had baking in the back. A bell over the door announced everyone who came and went. This was the kind of place that had once been the only place in town worth being seen at, and was now mostly a place old men came to sit with the newspaper because the coffee was still $1. Silas Vance had been sitting in the corner booth for 20 minutes, waiting on a call from his shop about a part that hadn't come in, when the old man's cane found the edge of his table. He was 55 years old, built solid through the chest, with a shaved head and forearms carrying 20 years of ink-faded soft at the edges. His cut carried the patches of the Grey Wolf Motorcycle Club, road captain, sergeant at arms before that, and a small black ribbon pinned below his collar that he had never once explained to anyone who asked. He always sat with his back to the wall and his eyes on the door, a habit so old he no longer noticed himself doing it. People in Cedar Hollow left that booth empty without being asked to. It was not that Silas was unfriendly. It was that his stillness made most rooms recalculate themselves the moment he walked into them. He had grown up in this county, left it twice, and come back twice, and these days he ran a small engine shop 2 blocks off the square, close enough to home that he could keep an eye on the mother he had, and the last 4 years of her life, not kept a close enough eye on, a fact he carried the way some men carry a limp. Quietly. Every day. He wanted, this morning, exactly one thing: to eat his breakfast, take his call, and get back to the shop before the lunch rush. He did not expect a blind stranger to sit down across from him and change the shape of his whole day. He watched the old man lower himself carefully into the seat, cane folded and set beside him with the precision of a man who had done this exact motion in this exact booth more times than he could count. He noted the shirt buttoned wrong. He noted, when the old man reached for the coffee cup Pete's daughter set in front of him, that his hand found it on the second try, not the first. The small hesitation of someone whose world had recently stopped matching the map in his head. "Help yourself," Silas said. "Coffee's better than the food, most days." Before we find out what Silas Vance was about to learn, if this is your first time here, go ahead and hit subscribe so this story doesn't get lost in the feed, and drop your city or state down in the comments below. I read every single one, and I want to see how far a story like this can travel. Now, back to the diner on the square. Because what this blind old man was about to say, without meaning to say it at all, would follow Silas out of that booth for the rest of the day. His name was Walter Halloran, though everyone in Cedar Hollow who had known him longer than a decade still called him Gus, a nickname from his Navy years nobody remembered the origin of anymore. He was 82. He had been blind for 6 years, Glaucoma the specialists in Knoxville had caught a little too late to stop, and a widower for 4, since his wife Miriam died in her sleep on a Sunday in November, with her hand still in his. For 40 years, every Tuesday, Miriam had walked him to Pete's diner for pie, rain or shine. A ritual that had outlived her by 4 years because Gus had never once considered letting it die with her. He still counted the same 142 steps from his front porch to the diner door, still knew exactly where the curb dropped and where the sidewalk buckled from an old oak root, still tapped the same 3 times on the doorframe before stepping through, a habit from Miriam telling him once, laughing, that it was good manners to knock even on a door you were about to open yourself. He still whittled, every morning at the kitchen table, small wooden birds, mostly wrens, shaped entirely by feel. A hobby from his years working the rail yard that he had never let his hands forget even after his eyes did. He gave the birds away to anyone who sat with him long enough to earn one. Since Miriam died, and even before Roland moved in to help, Gus had grown quietly used to being alone in a house too large for one blind man and the sound of his own memories. Carol called from Arizona when she could, but her job and her own 2 kids made when she could thinner than either of them liked to say out loud. Roland had filled that silence 8 months ago, cheerful and capable, the agency's top recommendation, and Gus had been, in his own words, grateful right up until the moment sitting across from Silas made him wonder, for the first time, whether gratitude was the only thing he ought to have been feeling. He mentioned, over pie, that he'd given away his last dozen birds to the church rummage sale. "That's odd," Silas said. "You don't seem like a man who gives those away easy." "I don't remember doing it," Gus said, still smiling, the smile of a man used to explaining away his own gaps rather than worrying at them. "Roland says I do that. Forget things. He's been staying with me since Miriam passed. Good man the agency sent him. Handles my paperwork. My eyes aren't much use for that anymore, you understand." He said it lightly, the way people say things they have decided not to examine too closely, because examining them would mean admitting how much of his life now passed through someone else's hands, entirely unverified. "The bank called last week," Gus added, almost as an afterthought, stirring sugar into coffee he could not see the color of. "Something about a form. Roland handled it, didn't want me troubling my head over numbers." The bell over the door rang hard enough to be a statement. Roland Fitch came in scanning the room the way a man scans a room he already suspects has cost him something, and when he found Gus in the corner booth his face, did the quick recalibration of someone remembering, mid-stride, that he was supposed to look worried rather than angry. "There you are." He said it warm, for the benefit of Pete's daughter behind the register. "You had me worried sick, Gus. You know you're not supposed to wander off without telling me." He crossed the diner floor fast, closed his hand around Gus's upper arm, and pulled him half out of the booth before the old man had even set his coffee down. Not gently, not roughly enough for a stranger to swear to it, firmly enough that Gus's shoulder dropped and a small sound of surprise caught in his throat. "We had an appointment this morning," Rollins said to Silas now, still smiling. Notary was coming by. He forgets things like that. Sweet man, but he's not always all there anymore, if you follow me. Gus did not correct him. Silas noticed that too, the particular, practiced way Gus's whole body went agreeable the instant Rollins' voice sharpened, the way a man's body learns to do when correcting someone has, at some point, cost him more than staying quiet ever has. "An appointment for what?" Silas asked. He did not raise his voice to ask it. "Paperwork," Rollins said. "Breezy. Nothing that concerns you." "He mentioned a form," Silas said. "From the bank. He gets confused about forms." Rollins' grip tightened, enough that Gus flinched. About a lot of things, honestly. It's the eyes, and some days, the mind right along with them. Gus's hand found the edge of the table and held on, the way a man holds on to something solid when he can feel the ground under a conversation shifting and cannot see which direction it's shifting toward. Silas had not decided anything yet. But something in him had already stopped being undecided. "Come on, Gus. Let's get you home." Roland pulled again, harder this time. And Gus's cane clattered off the booth seat onto the floor, and he had to grope blindly along the vinyl for it, his hand trembling now, while Roland's hand stayed locked around his arm instead of helping. Pete's daughter, behind the register, went busy polishing a milkshake glass that did not need polishing. Two men at the counter glanced over once and went back to their eggs. That was the town, Silas thought. Not cruel. Silent, in all the ways that mattered, because a blind old man being handled roughly by his own hired help looked, from 4 feet away, close enough to ordinary that nobody wanted to be the one who guessed wrong. "I had that cane before I had you," Gus whispered, feeling along the floor with his free hand. 40 years before I had you." "Sure, Gus." Roland's tone had the smoothness of a man performing patience for an audience he resented having to perform for at all. He leaned down close to Gus's ear then, his voice dropping into a register meant for an audience of exactly one. "We're not doing this in front of strangers. You remember what happened last time you made a scene." Something in Gus's face closed at that. The particular closing of a man who has decided, more than once, that whatever came after making a scene was worse than whatever came before it. "What form did I sign?" Gus asked, louder now, pushing the words out past whatever Roland had reminded him of. His voice had gone smaller with fear, but also, for the first time, insistent. "You said it was for my pills. The bank doesn't call about pills." The whole diner went quiet at that. Even the men at the counter turned around fully this time. Roland's smile thinned to something with an edge under it. He gets confused. "I told you. It's the—" "You said his eyes," Silas said. "Then you said his mind. Now you're saying both, whichever one keeps him quiet longest." Roland's hand tightened hard enough on Gus's arm that the old man's breath caught audibly, and Gus, 82 years old and blind and cornered in a booth he'd sat in for 4 decades, went completely still, the stillness of a man who has learned that stillness is the only variable he still controls. Silas set his fork down. He stood slowly, the way he did most things, and the booth did not so much as creak, because a man his size had spent 30 years learning how to move through small rooms without breaking anything he hadn't decided to break. He was close enough now that Roland had to look up to hold his eyes. "Let go of his arm," Silas said. Not a threat. A question shaped like an order, which is harder to answer than a threat, because a threat can be argued with and this could not. "Excuse me?" Roland's laugh came out thin. "This is between me and my client. You don't know this family. He's not your family," Silas said. "He's your job." He let that sit a second. There's a difference. Roland let go of Gus's arm to point a finger at Silas's chest instead, the first plainly foolish thing he had done since walking through the door. "You want to explain to the sheriff why some biker's harassing a caregiver doing his job?" "What did he sign this morning?" Silas asked. "That's confidential. Medical information." "Didn't ask about his medicine," Silas said. "Asked what he signed." Roland's mouth opened and shut once before anything came out of it, and in that half-second of silence, Pete's daughter, phone already raised behind the register, froze mid-motion, watching the same thing everyone else in the diner had started watching. A man who talked fast, running out of things to say fast about. Gus's hand found his cane at last, and he pulled it into his lap and held it the way another man might hold a rifle, both hands steady, the only steady thing left in the booth. "I'm calling the sheriff," Roland said, phone already out, thumb jabbing the screen. "I'll tell them you assaulted a caregiver in front of his patient." "Who do you think they believe? Some biker? Or a man with medical paperwork and a college degree?" Silas didn't move to stop him. He sat back down instead, unhurried, and that, more than anything he could have said, seemed to unsettle Roland more. "Go ahead," Silas said. "Call them. I'll wait right here." "You think this is a bluff? I think you should hurry up." Silas paused. "Company's coming." "What company?" Chapter's 12 miles out. Was already headed this way for a supply run. Called it in when your hand first landed on his arm. Silas nodded toward the window, toward the empty square outside. "Should be here in about 4 minutes. Roland laughed, short and forced, but something in his eyes had already started doing the math. "More of you." "Great, more than you'd like," Silas said, and the stillness in his face made Pete's daughter lower her phone an inch and go quiet in a way she hadn't been the whole time. For a long moment, nobody in the diner spoke. The pie case hummed under the register light, and somewhere in the kitchen a spoon clinked once against a bowl, and underneath both of those ordinary sounds there was, faintly, a third one that had not been there a minute earlier. A rumble. Low, rising from somewhere past the courthouse, past the edge of the square. Gus lifted his blind face toward the sound before anyone told him what it was. The way a man does when a sound reaches him the same exact way it once reached him decades earlier from a garage 2 doors down. Back when his own hands were young enough to build engines instead of birds. Engines, that was the only word Gus needed, and he heard it coming a full 10 seconds before anyone with working eyes did. The rumble built low, and then lower, then filled the whole square at once, rattling the pie case glass hard enough that the register itself hummed along with it. Roland's head snapped toward the window, and whatever composure he had left broke completely the moment he understood what he was hearing. They came around the courthouse in a long, unbroken line, chrome flashing under the morning sun, and they did not stop coming. 40, 80 more, the square in front of Pete's Diner, built for parallel parking and Saturday farmers markets. Filled with motorcycles the way a bowl fills under a faucet left running, fast, then faster, then, all at once, completely still. 156 of them, the county paper would report the next day, though nobody in that diner was counting yet. The engines killed almost together. No one spoke. No one revved for show. 156 riders stood beside their bikes in the cold morning light, and the silence that followed sat over that courthouse square heavier than anything Cedar Hollow had heard in years. A woman walked in first, older than Silas, silver hair cropped short, a sergeant's patch of her own. She crossed the diner floor the way Silas had crossed 4 feet of it minutes earlier, and found his eyes before anyone else's. "You good, Silas?" she asked. "I'm good, Ruth," Silas said. "He's not." He nodded toward Gus. "Robbed blind, is my guess. And I don't think it's only about the money." Ruth's eyes moved to Gus for the first time. The cane held like a rifle across his lap. The shirt buttoned wrong. The careful stillness of a man who had spent an entire conversation with his own life, reading like a stranger's. And whatever hard-won calm sat in her face gave way to something else. "Sir," she said, crouching until she was level with him. "My name's Ruth. You're safe now. Are you certain of that?" Gus whispered, his hand still tight around his cane. About as certain as I've been of anything, Ruth said. Roland Fitch looked out at 156 motorcycles filling a square he had nowhere left to drive out of, and did not wait for the sheriff, who was, in fact, already 4 minutes out. He set his phone down on the table and did not say another word until the deputies arrived. The deputies who arrived 9 minutes later found more than enough to start with. A diner full of witnesses. A signature on a power of attorney form Gus had never been told the true nature of, and a bank account missing nearly $40,000 over 8 months. Roland Fitch was arrested that morning on charges of elder financial exploitation, and Adult Protective Services opened a file that, once his niece Carol flew in from Arizona 3 days later, grew considerably thicker. Carol moved back to Cedar Hollow within the month. She found the bank records Gus could never have read himself, the forged signatures, the birds quietly sold off one by one to a shop 2 counties over that Roland had never once mentioned. She found, too, 3 months of medical logs showing doses of a sedative that no doctor in the county had ever prescribed for Gus, filed neatly alongside the paperwork, as if honesty and its opposite could share the same drawer without either one noticing the other. Silas Vance did not stay for any of the paperwork. He finished his coffee, left money on the table for both breakfasts, and walked back out to his bike the way he left most things, without ceremony, without needing to be thanked twice for a decision that had, in the end, taken him about 4 minutes to make. He still stops at Pete's Diner most Tuesdays now, though he no longer sits alone. Gus saves him the same corner booth and hands him a wren carved fresh that morning before either of them has said a word about why. Gus Halloran has a shelf of wrens again, rebuilt one careful bird at a time, though he keeps account now of the birds he gives away and of the people he gives them to, because Carol reads him the ledger every Sunday so that nothing in his life passes through anyone's hands unverified again. He does not know exactly why a stranger with a shaved head and 20 years of ink chose, on an ordinary Tuesday, to ask a harder question than the one Gus had asked him. He only knows that he did. If this story reached you, if you believe the people we trust to care for those who can't see clearly anymore should be the last people we need protecting from, share it with someone who needs the reminder. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. And down in the comments, tell me where you're watching from this morning. And if you've ever looked out for someone who couldn't look out for themselves, type watchful below so Silas knows it mattered.